What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is ranking the greatest Americans in history.
Ooh, this is going to be good, isn't it?
But it doesn't state what Americans. So I'm guessing
Any
like
Americans.
maybe presidents, maybe like, I don't know, random celebrity people.
Yeah, I think it's just, if you're American, right, it's going to be the greatest.
So anyone is up for grabs on the list.
Anyone. So like Michael Jordan, I'm guessing. People say he's one of the greatest basketball players. Probably on the list. I assume he's American. I'm 99% sure he's American.
Like Taylor Swift and Selena Gomez could be up there.
I don't know about them too. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not convinced. Let us know in the comments if you're convinced someone, because I'm not. Smash the like button while you're there. And make sure you subscribe. We'd seriously appreciate it. About 60% of people not subscribed.
It's just not good enough.
It's not good enough. So smash that subscribe button and be an absolute legend. And are you ready to check out ranking the greatest Americans in history?
I am. What we got?
What we got. Let's
What we
go.
got?
So, a couple of weeks ago, I made a video about the greatest people in history as determined by a series of TV contests that were held in countries around the world in the early 2000s. The American version of this was a show called Greatest Americans, and it aired on the Discovery Channel in the year 2005. The way it worked is that the show did a survey of the American public in which they were asked to name the greatest American who had ever...
What do you mean are we doing? What are you on about?
Are we rating the show?
No, on a show.
Okay. Do we rate the people?
They did the greatest Americans and he's covering that show.
Okay.
You're right.
Yeah.
Lived, and then they revealed the top 100 most popular choices. They then had a second round of voting to re-rank the top 10. And spoiler alert, Ronald Reagan won. Anyway, today I thought we would dive a little bit deeper into the results of this 15-year-old survey, which, despite being 15 years old, is still one of the most comprehensive efforts to document the greatest Americans that has ever been done. So let us take a closer look at the sort of people who made it into the top 100.
Is this a 2015
How
video,
has
then?
our definition of what is a
2005.
great American...
Oh.
2005. He said 2005, didn't he?
They said 2000s.
Ooh,
Early 2000s.
We'll just check. Oh, by the way, we're not subscribed. We were definitely...
made 2 years ago.
Yeah, 2020. So it'll be, I reckon 2020 was made. 2015, I'm pretty sure he said in it. I can't remember. Are you alright?
No, I'm sure 2000s popped up, but maybe that was not.
I swear it was 2005, but I think it was 2005.
Yeah.
Let's check it out.
changed over the last decade and a half. Who did we think was
2005.
great back then that we maybe think is not so great now? And who were some of the most obscure or dated choices that made it in? So let us get into it.
Let's get into it.
The top 10 went like this. Ronald Reagan in first place, Abraham Lincoln in second,
A lot of
Martin
presidents.
Luther King Jr. in third,
Good
George
shout.
Washington in fourth, and Ben Franklin in fifth. So
Obviously
far,
gonna be
relatively uncontroversial, right? Well, except for maybe Reagan being in first place. As I said in my first video, at the time that this survey was done, Reagan had only died a year earlier, which was treated as this very big deal and sort of resulted in an outpouring of Reagan nostalgia across America.
That makes
All
sense.
Millard Fillmore schools are now Ronald Reagans. The Mississippi River is now the Mississippi Reagan.
And my good friend Frankenstein is now Franken Reagan.
But on the
Good
other
old
hand,
Simpsons.
Reagan was also very popular, even in his own time. And he is still, to this day, ranked very highly when Americans or American historians are asked to name the greatest ever presidents. More controversial, however, was George W. Bush being in sixth place, who was the current president of the United States at the time.
That
Bush
makes sense.
today is, I feel, not regarded all that well, even among fellow Republicans. But in 2005, he had just been re-elected less than a year ago, and partisan politics being what it is, a lot of Republicans were still very fiercely loyal to him. This is an important thing to keep in mind these days when people sometimes freak out about how popular Donald Trump is with
Is he
Republicans.
Canadian?
Who?
Him. I don't know where he's from. He's saying about it kind of seems a
Yeah,
bit
also
Canadian.
got Canada in the back.
Yeah, I think he might be Canadian. I'm useless with it, but I swear that about he's probably saying that about any like the accent
Yeah,
wise.
is President Bush the president who was president at the time of 9/11?
Yes.
Yes, because he did the talks around the schools. I thought I recognised him.
And he did the speech at 9/11 and stuff like that.
The fact is, all presidents tend to be very popular with partisans of their own side, and it can take a while for these feelings to melt away.
That makes
Case in
sense.
point, greatest American number 7, Bill Clinton, who at that time was the most recent Democrat president. After Clinton came Elvis and then Oprah,
Fair play.
who I don't think it is a stretch to say are two of the biggest American celebrities of
They are
all
big
time.
stars, aren't
You
they?
can can tell because they only need a first name. Then in 10th place, we have Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Democratic president associated with getting America out of the Great Depression and leading the country through World War II. All right, so that was the top 10, but now let us talk about the rest of the top 25, which in some ways I think was actually less controversial. It's in numbers 11 through 25 that you get some of the real cliched famous Americans, including Thomas Jefferson, Walt Disney, JFK, Thomas Edison, Muhammad Ali, Rosa Parks, the Wright brothers, and Neil Armstrong. There are maybe a couple of controversial picks, however. Number 11, for instance, was the preacher Billy Graham. Graham is considered a leading figure in the American evangelical Christian revival of the 1960s onward. It is a movement that has had tremendous impact in American culture and politics, and is actually something I am working on a whole other video about. But that being said, while the evangelical Christian movement is a controversial thing in modern America, and always has been, Billy Graham has long had a reputation as like the one evangelical everyone could agree on. He was a spiritual advisor to presidents of both parties, and particularly as he got older, he sort of earned a reputation as being a much friendlier, milder, more moderate, less ideological, and less combative figure than evangelical preachers often have a reputation for being. Number 20, meanwhile, was Lance Armstrong. Now this is a good example of a choice that has not aged well. Lance Armstrong was, of course, an extreme...
Well, he's going to probably explain it, but he's the cyclist who won probably like 6 Tour de France or something, or 6 big titles, or maybe Olympics. I don't know exactly.
I thought he was the brother of Neil Armstrong.
No, he wasn't, but then he got done for doping. So he was actually cheating throughout all his wins. But for ages, he was like, oh, there's amazing cyclist. But I think it was red blood cells or something like that. So that's why it's dated badly. Because at the time, I imagine he didn't get done for cheating.
No.
So that's why I was up there.
Extremely successful professional cyclist who won the Tour de France a record 7 times between 1999 and 2005. During the early 2000s, he was undeniably one of the most beloved Americans of his time, not just for his athletic prowess, but also for his very brave and high-profile battle with testicular cancer. If you lived through that time, I'm sure you very much remember his whole Live Strong anti-cancer fundraising movement. Now, there had long been rumors, particularly in the French media, that Armstrong was using performance-enhancing drugs, but these charges were easily dismissed as just the French being salty that an American was better at their thing than they were. There was a lot of anti-French sentiment in the US in those days. But then, in 2012, a bombshell investigation by the United States Anti-Doping Agency revealed that Armstrong had, in fact, been using performance-enhancing drugs, and Lance himself eventually confessed everything to Greatest American number 9.
Did you ever take banned substances to enhance your cycling performance?
Yes. Greatest American
In your
number
opinion,
9.
was it humanly possible to win the Tour de France without doping 7 times in a row?
Not in my opinion.
So he was stripped of all of his awards and prestige and is now probably one of the greatest disgraced Americans of all time.
It is mad though, isn't it, how he thinks he could lie for that long and get away with it on such a massive scale. And he had pretty much got away with it for a long time.
But it always gets found out when you do stuff like that. So.
Yeah, definitely. I was surprised this one got found out though, because again, we were only born in 99, so we were young, I don't really know all the details, I just knew about it. I assume he stopped racing by then, so I was surprised they went back and looked into it.
How do you prove it after?
I don't know. Let us know in the comments a bit more on that.
Crack and then
no, but
tell people.
The doping came out. Wait, what?
Unless they make him crack, and then do you not get it?
No, I don't get it.
Okay. Moving on. Moving on.
What?
Moving on.
Henry Ford is also on the list.
Let us know if you get in the comments.
24th place. He is, of course, best known as the inventor of the modern automobile and the founder of the Ford Motor Company. But he also has a fairly dark reputation these days because of how anti-Semitic he was. So he's certainly someone who's a little dodgy to like too openly. It is in the list of the final 75 greatest Americans that we really start to find some odd choices, however. For whatever reason, the Discovery Channel never released the rank order of the final 75. So all we have is a giant pile of names of famous Americans who are like broadly popular, but not exactly top tier in terms of greatness.
So it could be any
the
order.
biggest subcategory of people in the bottom 75 is basically what we could just call showbiz people. People like Tom Hanks, Steven Spielberg, Katharine Hepburn, Clint Eastwood, John Wayne, George Lucas, Marilyn Monroe. Basically all of the most iconic Hollywood big shots. A couple of now disgraced people are in here too, of course, like convicted sex criminal Bill Cosby and noted anti-Semitic lunatic Mel Gibson. But back in 2005, people were still in a lot of denial about all of this. The most interesting minor Hollywood person of the time who made it into the bottom 75 is probably Ellen DeGeneres. In 2005, Ellen had basically just started her talk show. So this is a rare example of a pick that has actually aged well, since I would say Ellen has only become more famous and more beloved over the last 15 years. I could easily see her making it into the
but
top
she's more
25.
popular, got a bigger show and stuff like that.
Not popular anymore.
The
show got taken off air.
Is it? I have no clue. I
think it was last year.
But when he made this, it was then, to be fair.
When he made this, it was, and then it got taken off air with the way that she was treating all her staff and everything.
There you go. Oh, it's gone downhill again.
Oh.
Stated. Just people turn bad in the end, it seems like.
It seems like
If they did this poll today, there are a lot fewer musicians than you might expect. Only Frank Sinatra, Ray Charles, Madonna, and Michael Jackson. Can you think of some notable American musicians who are missing? Let me know in the comments. After entertainment people, the next largest category is politicians, which is mostly just like every president of the last 100 years. 3 first ladies made it in as well. Eleanor Roosevelt, who is often considered to have been the greatest first lady of all time, made it into the top 25, in case you were wondering. But once you get beyond the presidents, basically every politician in the bottom 75 are terribly myopic choices that have not aged well at all. So, for example, we have Colin Powell and Condoleezza Rice, the 2 secretaries of state in the George W. Bush administration. Both were the highest-ranking African Americans in the history of the U.S. government up to that point. But today, both are probably better known for their close association with the planning of the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. That war was still relatively popular circa 2005. But today it is not something that anyone really wants to take credit for. Former Senator John Edwards, who was Democrat John Kerry's vice presidential nominee in the 2004 presidential election, somehow made it in as well. John Kerry himself, however, did not. At the time, John Edwards was seen as this dynamic, young up-and-comer in the Democratic Party. But then, in 2011, he became horribly disgraced when it was revealed that he had been using campaign funds to cover up an affair he was having while his wife was dying of cancer. He ultimately got off on criminal charges, but I don't think anyone knows or cares what he's up to these days.
It is,
Rudy Giuliani also made it.
I was going to say, all these people, by the way, we don't really know, do we? We know, obviously, the more famous ones. But I think when you start getting to politicians, especially around the time where, like you say, we weren't really around then, were we? We don't know him, do we? So we're learning.
We just judge on what he tells us.
You can only go on what he says.
Mayor of New York City during 9/11 and was a heroic symbol of American resilience for many years after. But you know, these days he is probably better known for being the most high-profile member of President Trump's legal defense team his, shall we say, less than eloquent TV performances.
Shut up, moron. Shut up.
But there were some fairly prescient political inclusions as well, such as a certain recently elected junior senator from Illinois, or a certain New York businessman who had recently started his own reality show. But once you get beyond the politicians, most of the remaining picks are relatively uncontroversial. So you got George Washington Carver, Amelia Earhart, John Glenn, Steve Jobs, Michael Jordan, Malcolm
There you go.
X,
I said Michael Jordan, and this whole time I was saying, like, I can't believe my picks. Yeah, your pick ain't making it on there, unfortunately. I think 2005 this is as well.
Selena Gomez, was she even hot back then?
What? I don't know.
Hot on the press.
I don't know.
She might have just.
She must have been quite young then.
No, I think 2010, 2009 was Justin Bieber. That's only 4 years. I don't know.
I don't think she'd have made the press anyway. To be honest, I don't think she'd have made it, even if it was now.
Favre, I wish I knew more about football. Is he still considered a big deal? Tom Brady isn't on the list, and I feel that would never ever happen today. Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, made it on, I assume because a lot of Mormons voted for him. I feel like his reputation among non-Mormons isn't very high, however. He's probably more likely to be known as a serial polygamist as anything else. So here are two people on the list that I was not super familiar with, but you can see if you recognize their names. Audie Murphy and Chuck Yeager.
Oh, yeah,
so Audie Murphy, I have learned, was a heroic American soldier from World War II, famous for winning basically all of the medals, as you can see in this photo. According to the New York Times, his daring exploits seem almost like a video game caricature. He is said to have killed more than 200 Nazis. For this, Murphy became one of the most famous men in America immediately after the war. For a while, he tried to be a movie star, but he never achieved much success in that realm. Then in 1971, he abruptly died in a plane crash. The impression I get is that Audie Murphy was a very iconic figure for a certain older generation of American, and then when that generation lost its cultural influence, Murphy sort of faded from the national imagination.
That kind of makes sense.
I mean, I have collected a lot of books about famous 20th century Americans over the years, and I could not find a single reference to Audie Murphy in any of them. But I guess a lot of old folks watch the Discovery Channel. Chuck Yeager, meanwhile, is a much more famous guy, although his fame is also very tied up in one particular generational moment. Yeager was a fighter pilot during World War II, and in 1947, he test flew a new rocket-powered jet known as the X-1 at an unprecedented speed of over 700 miles per hour, faster than the speed of sound.
Wow, first person to do it, that's insane.
In the supersonic chapter in the history of aviation.
I'd love to be the first person to do something.
We're there.
Chuck Yeager is actually still alive, although
because if it is the first person, you don't know if it's going to work or not. You know what I mean? If you're first, you don't know.
He's getting close to 100 at this point. For the last few decades, he's been this sort of good-natured guy who gives speeches and interviews and things about the historic moment that he was part of. The good-natured former pilot who was part of some historic moment is a kind of fun type of American celebrity, don't you think? All right, now let us talk about the person who I consider to be the most obscure in the top 100. The name that I would say makes the whole list feel the most dated. Patrick Tillman. Has anyone under 30 ever heard of Pat Tillman? He was a professional football player from the Arizona Cardinals who famously quit the NFL to volunteer for the U.S. Army after 9/11. And then he was killed in Afghanistan in 2004. And for a brief period, he was really held up as a symbol of patriotic sacrifice in the post-9/11 era. Today, however, we know that Tillman died because he was accidentally shot to death by fellow U.S. soldiers in this very tragic and confused confrontation in which he was mistaken for the enemy, which was a much less grand story than what the military had originally put out, which is that he had been shot by the Taliban while storming up a hill with a machine gun to defend his fellow men below. Once the truth came out, a lot of people felt very deceived by the way that the military had initially propagandized his death, and there were congressional hearings about it and everything. The full scandal of the Pat Tillman tragedy...
That's such a weird thing, because it shouldn't really matter. At the end of the day, he's gone to serve his country. It doesn't actually matter how it's happened, because it's happened because he's there serving his country in huge respect.
And you know, accidents do happen.
Definitely.
When you're in that kind of environment, that's kind of a risk that you always know of, isn't it?
Yeah, and I feel bad for him because he's getting bad press for something he hadn't done.
Well, it sounds like he's just stormed ahead and done... And everyone's just going to be hating on him for that.
But I don't think they're hating on him. I'm guessing, please let us know in the comments if you knew more. I'm guessing the military have tried to cover it up because of it. It's been a confusion, lives have been lost from the it looks a bit disorganised. So they're going for this, but it's come out of the truth and go, well, why are you lying to us? And he's kind of caught in the crossfire because he were held as this, do you know what I mean? Emo dying in any way is, again,
like
respect up there.
Sometimes too much press about you can have a negative impact, even though it's
not
a negative...
I think they've just tried to cover something up, and he's involved in the situation, so it's kind of dampened his legacy a little bit. Even if it originally would come out, it'd have still been just as moving, but because of the bad press, it's dampened it a little bit. But it's not his fault. Do you get me?
Yeah.
I think that's what. Please let us know in the comments if that's the way, because again, it doesn't matter how you die. it's the service, isn't it? And again, huge respects. It's so scary, isn't it? But
he was only really starting to become mainstream knowledge around the time that the Greatest American TV competition was happening, which is why his inclusion in this list feels very dark in retrospect. Anyway, let me try to lighten the mood a bit with a closing assignment for you all. Imagine that the Discovery Channel did a survey like this today. What person who has only become famous in the last few years do you think would have a justifiable place on a list
Selena Gomez.
okay, all right.
of the top 100 greatest Americans? In other words, what relatively new celebrity do you think will only become more famous and more appreciated over the next 15 years? Who is the Ellen or Barack Obama of this moment? And secondly, who is the John Edwards or Pat Tillman of this moment? That is, who do you think would get voted into the top 100 Americans if the survey was held today, but would seem like a really dated or embarrassing choice like 15 years later? I am really keen to hear your ideas. If I had to do this myself, I would say that maybe I could see Mike Pence making it into a list of the top 100 greatest Americans, even though I cannot imagine that he is going to wind up as a politician with much of a long-term legacy. But then, on the other hand, I could also imagine a lot of Americans voting for Kanye, and I think he is probably going to be remembered as a major American cultural figure for a long time to come. Anyway, Drake, let me know your picks in the thing below. And if you want to see
Drake's Canadian, isn't it? That was interesting. Let us know your answers in the comments below.
There's a mix of people.
Yeah, I honestly don't know. But you guys are the best because you are American. You got your culture a bit more than us. Well, a lot more than us and stuff like that. So let us know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Do you enjoy that?
Yeah, it was interesting.
It was interesting. I actually got a pick on there as well. I'm happy with that. Unfortunately, you didn't, but you tried your best.
Maybe next time. Maybe in 10 years.
Maybe. Smash the like button, guys. Smash the subscribe button and watch the video.
Have a fantastic day.
And we will see you legends in the next one. Peace.